Welcome to BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast. We're joined by judges and legal professionals to discuss emerging trends, regulatory updates, and the latest headlines. We'll provide tips to help your law firms and legal departments make the most out of legal technology.
Hi everyone, I'm Jared Crafton, BDO's Forensic Technology Practice Leader.
And I'm Daniel Gold, Forensics Principal and Leader of the eDiscovery Managed Services Practice.
Let's get started with this episode's exciting topic.
Welcome back to another edition of BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast. We are joined today with a very special episode. Joining us in the virtual recording studio is both Nat Edmonds, who is a partner, white collar investigation over at Paul Hastings, and also we have with us, which is the first, Jared, that we've ever done this, we have a fellow BDO professional joining us, Pei-Li Wang. So Nat, Pei-Li, welcome to the program. It's so nice to have both of you here.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Nat and Pei-Li, I could give some lengthy, introductions about your tremendous backgrounds for both of you. But often what I find is LinkedIn profiles, is resumes don't really do people any justice. So Nat, if I could start with you, if you could just give a little bit of a highlight of your professional background, sort of credential yourself for us would be fantastic.
Well, thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys and your listeners. And I have been working in the investigations white collar world for over 20 years. I started my career at the Department of Justice as an honors attorney in the criminal division fraud section and spent a decade there doing a variety of white collar investigations, from multi-billion-dollar accounting frauds with 4-month trials to congressional corruption cases pursuing both lobbyists and elected officials, to some of the largest international corruption cases at the time as part of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act unit within the fraud section. So I spent about a decade there, had a really amazing experience, really had a great opportunity to serve the public, understand kind of the legal and international business world. And then I shifted to Paul Hastings, where I've been for over a decade as well. I'm a investigations white collar defense partner, focusing broadly on international criminal enforcement, focusing mostly on international corruption or Foreign Corrupt Practices Act cases, FCPA cases, although I'm increasingly connected to a variety of other regulatory and criminal offenses linked to those, whether it is trade controls or sanctions, whether it is a variety of other international issues. My specialty is dealing with crises, with big cases that put the company at risk, and kind of walking them through the most significant legal, factual, and business issues for them to deal with. And I've been blessed or cursed, depending on how you look at it, with handling some big cases, as well as some smaller cases, which are really, really important to the people that are in the middle of it. I love what I do. I am constantly learning about new things, being faced with new challenges in a changing enforcement environment, changing regulatory environment. And I get an opportunity to work with great professionals at BDO and elsewhere to do some of the great work that we all do together.
That's fantastic. And one of the things that I can already tell, Jared, that we're going to love talking with Nat here is the level of passion you have just in talking about your background. And one of the things in particular that I thought was so noteworthy was you said that you've been serving the public. And I love that because it speaks volumes about how you perceived yourself and your role working at the DOJ. So that's fantastic. And obviously, we appreciate the service that you provided to the public as a result. Pei-Li, why don't you talk about your background? Obviously, what is the connection that you've got here to Nat?
Well, Nat and I have worked together. I think we've known other for over 10 years by now. And we really had fun working together. I am a principal here at BDO. I'm based in New York with a focus on cross-border forensic work. And so that calls in the FCPA part of it, which is a lot focused on cross-border transactions and business activities. I spent half my life by now in Asia. I started out as an auditor. I was based in Singapore, grew up there, and got exposed to some of the issues in that region, especially in China and India and others, as an auditor. And when I made the switch to forensics over 20 years ago, it's natural for me to continue focusing on that. And so at BDO, I also lead the Asia Forensics Desk. And Like Ned, I've been working on many FCPA cases, and some of them do not originate as FCPA cases. And in others, they actually turn into something else or something bigger that came out of FCPA allegations. In addition to some of the anti-corruption work, I've increasingly spent time in export controls and sanctions work as well. So anything that has to do with international supply chain fraud, that's one of our focus areas here.
I'd note that my particular area of interest, one of the things that brought me to the FCPA was Asia. So I lived in Asia as a child growing up, and then I lived in China shortly after college and thought I would have nothing to do with Asia again, did other business consulting before coming back to law school, and then eventually spent a significant amount of time for DOJ building relationships in Asia, including as the point person on corruption for DOJ to China, having met with the Chinese government, Chinese prosecutors to try to build cooperation between the US and China, given some of the overlapping interests and at times competing interests. But I do think that one of the fascinating things that draw people to this profession is the impact of the international business environment, the fascinating cultural shifts that can occur, and really unique fact patterns that can make for good stories at a dinner party or a bar, depending on the stories you're willing to tell.
Well, speaking of which, when somebody comes up to you and says to you at a bar or a party, what exactly you do, and you start rambling off all these acronyms, sometimes it may be a little overwhelming and intimidating. So why don't we take a big step backwards for all of our listeners and we talk about the FCPA? That's obviously the focus of our conversation here. And the FCPA is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And for those who don't recall, former President Jimmy Carter back in 1977 was the one who enacted this into law. And if my understanding is right, Nat, and you are the expert, not me on this area, is that the law was enacted mainly because of some revelations of widespread bribery of foreign officials by US companies. And that's the reason why it was there. What I'm wondering is, to start us off, maybe you could talk to us in your own words about explain the FCPA, discuss its significance with us, and why is it so important for Americans who operate internationally to understand what this is?
Part of the reason that the FCPA is relevant is it impacts economic growth because you're giving away your profit margin to a government decision maker. You are not investing in service. You're not investing in the best products that's out there. It distorts the economic environment. But fundamentally, it is a breakdown in the rule of law. And if you are willing to break the law to gain an additional sale, the US government has made very clear that this is also a risk on the national security side, that all of a sudden this money may be floating in different directions. This may be threatening national security of the United States and around the world.
I've been doing FCPA work for a very long time. I'm curious of your perspective of, the shifting enforcement over the years. It's been on the books, as you've said, for a very, very long time, but it seems like it's only been since, maybe your career got started that it's really been hot. It's really been a focus of the DOJ and the SEC. Could you take a minute and just kind of describe, what the current enforcement looks like and how that has shifted from previous years?
I think the current enforcement is at some of the highest levels that it has ever been. And I think DOJ and SEC are threatening more, especially with the growth of global enforcement partners and new incentive structures, creating a whistleblower bounty program, encouraging a variety of other ways to get information to the enforcement agencies that is useful for law enforcement. But I would say that the growth has been pretty dramatic. I started at DOJ in 2003, and the enforcement wave really took off a few years after that. I think my first enforcement FCPA case was 2005 in some of this, and I dabbled in some other things along the way, but it has grown from a DOJ enforcement piece from a handful, less than 5 FCPA-focused attorneys to more than 30, just in the DC fraud section FCPA unit, and they have well over 30 partner AUSAs in offices around the US. And that doesn't even count the global partners, which when I was there, it was an important part of my job traveling the world to meet with the UK, to meet with the French authorities, to meet with Russia, to meet with Brazil, to meet with Sweden, to try to build partnerships, some of which were successful, some of which were not. But the current global enforcement is very much not US only, but increasingly multi-jurisdictional. And that leads to a variety of legal issues, technological issues in terms of what is legal or allowed to export, to retain, to image in a variety of different countries around the world. And it significantly increases the enforcement risk for companies who are out there who may never thought that they would face this. And is also one where it is not simply a US issue, but really a global risk for companies that are out there.
So that's interesting that you were saying about talking about how this is a global issue. And that's actually a question I wanted to ask you. So you are a US delegate to an organization I'd love for you to talk more about. And then I'm going to have a question for you about it naturally. But speaking of acronyms, you're a part of OECD, and that is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, if I'm not mistaken. And you are part of a working group on bribery. Walk us through, please, Nat. Like, what does that group do? Why are you a part of it?
So I was a part of it when I was part of the US government, when I was at the DOJ. And it is a collection of different economies around the world, over 40 different of the major developed economies around the world. And the Working Group on Bribery actually was established in the late 90s to essentially internationalize the FCPA. So the FCPA had been enforced primarily against US companies. And so the Working Group on Bribery has collected a variety of different countries around the world, the UK, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Japan, Brazil, a variety of the countries that are there, to enact legislation that is equivalent to the FCPA, to essentially set out that it is illegal not just in the United States for US companies to bribe, but it's going to be illegal for a Russian company to bribe or a Korean company to bribe, to level the playing field, as it were. And so the role of the OECD and the Working Group on Bribery, when I was one of the US delegates to that, is to essentially evaluate the legislation and the enforcement of these different laws around the world, whether it is Peru, whether it is Switzerland, whether it is Italy, to say, are you doing enough to enforce your laws against your own companies that are violating international bribery laws? And if you're not, hey, you know what? The US may step in and do that type of thing. There were law enforcement meetings that shared intelligence, and there was evidence or leads that were shared, which have led to some of the largest cases that have been brought by the US and others. It is a multinational or multi-economic group that is there to essentially ensure that there is a level playing field, and US companies are not the only ones that are subject to the international corruption laws.
How have you seen the cooperation change over the years when you were a part of it?
I would say it changed pretty dramatically. When I first started working on FCPA cases, it was basically US only. I was involved in, I think, 3 joint cases with the UK that were resolved early on, but late in my tenure at DOJ. And it has now grown dramatically, where if you look at either the DOJ or the SEC's, who they thank, and that's always the critical piece, who they thank in their press releases, inside tip, that's what matters. You're going to see that they are thanking everybody from Singapore to Brazil to the Cayman Islands to the Isle of Man to Switzerland to UK to the Netherlands. And those are partners that some of which would not have been involved years ago. South Africa, Australia, you've got the Philippines, you've got a variety of different countries that have taken on different roles, some of which are enforcing their own laws, and some of which are just now cooperating and providing evidence and information to the US enforcement authorities or to the main enforcers that are out there, which is going to be Brazil, UK, France, Netherlands, Switzerland.
You're just showing us the scale, I think, of the global coordination it takes, both in enforcement, but then also, if a company does have an incident and they need to investigate it and they need to get boots on the ground and figure out what happened and figure out exactly what, the damages may be. Haley, I know you've done investigations all over the world. What are some of the challenges in these cross-border investigations that you see?
The very fact that we're in multiple jurisdictions, working in different locales and experiencing different cultures, business practices that the company needs to look into. I think that on its own presents several challenges. The resources, right? And one of the things that I think continues to be a challenge today from way back when is building a team or putting together a team that has all of these strengths and skills and qualifications to help the company move forward with their monitoring, with their investigations, with their testings and audits. And, it's not just about knowing the local culture and business practice. It's also understanding how to navigate the local environment and have a very, very good, strong understanding of what the US regulators and other regulators expect of the company. And that might also include some awareness of the different various international laws that might affect the company. My first exposures to export controls and anti-money laundering came from an FCPA case that I was working on. And that's many years ago. And then you bring along all these other factors like international tax laws, transfer pricing, minimum export prices, all these other laws and regulations that come together to create that environment that a company operates in. It is very challenging. So that would be one of the challenges that I see.
If you're ready to take on the biggest challenges in e-discovery, then access BDO's latest ebook, How to Tackle and Manage 5 Common E-Discovery Challenges. BDO developed this ebook to provide actionable insights and strategies tailored for legal professionals. Dive into essential topics such as data privacy, cost management, and advanced technologies to streamline your e-discovery process. Download the ebook on BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast page. Nat, one of the things that we definitely wanted you to talk about, obviously the genesis of this whole podcast is talking about technology. When we talk about FCPA in the context of technology, what have you seen in your tenure as far as advancements in technology, whether it's e-discovery, whether it's artificial intelligence? How has the advancements in technology impacted how you've been prosecuting cases, if you will, with FCPA, even as your time as partner over at Paul Hastings? What does that look like from your perspective, from your vantage point? Has it gotten easier? Has it become more complex? There's more data types, there's more data volumes, but that's being fixed as a result of all this great technology that's out there. What does the landscape look like for you?
I mean, unfortunately, you go back to the history lesson of just binders and boxes, right? So when I first started doing FCPA cases, right, there were binders and boxes of hard copy documents, right? And some of them were printed out emails, and it started with nobody knew which time zone it was in, right? So like that got very confusing when you're building chronologies, right? Those are simple fixes that now can be very easily fixed on a technological level. But I think the fundamental challenge on all of this is the volume of data is just dramatically increased exponentially. So long ago, you would have email, and occasionally some of my cases even had pager data and stuff like that, if you go back really, really long on some of this stuff. But that was it. And it was really limited in terms of what's there. We did not have these mobile devices in our hands, which means that the volume of communications is immense. And so being able to understand how to image data, not only in laptops, on servers, on shared drives, on cloud drives, all over the world through a variety of different data privacy regulations, cybersecurity issues that are there, but then be able to cut the data in a way that is useful, in a way that is cost efficient for companies that are paying a huge amount to host the data, but also to have people review the data. And that is a critical piece, but it is just, there's way too much data that's out there. And I have cases with huge numbers of terabytes of data. And comparing this to the size of the Library of Congress and all the data in the Library of Congress it's multiple times the entire Library of Congress. And if that's the case, how on earth can we look at it and identify that needle in the haystack when people are sometimes using coded language, using messaging apps, oftentimes in my cases in multiple languages? Right? So you have to have a remarkably talented tech team and an analysis team that can understand what the data is, where it's stored, and how to fit it all together, especially as often happens when things are deleted in a way that sometimes can drive us directly to what is most important, at least in their minds. And you need a talented tech team to be able to look at that and fundamentally find that needle in those 10 terabytes of data that you've collected along the way.
Something else you mentioned that was really interesting, though, and you said that Library of Congress, the reason why I find that interesting is, as Jared and Palene know, I give CLEs all over the country, and I talk about the introduction of legal technology and attorneys' ethical responsibility to understand it. And one of the things I talk about is the growth of data. It's so funny you mentioned Library of Congress because I actually have a slide where I talk about, can anybody guess how much data would be if you digitized every physical copy of every book in the entire Library of Congress? And the answer is 10 terabytes. And I often say, as part of that slide, that is, if you don't have the right team and you don't have the right technology, it's literally like reading every single book cover to cover in the entire Library of Congress, which is the largest library in the United States of America. And I find that so interesting that you bring that up. And you're right, the data volumes are growing so much, and you talk about the communication part of it. Do you find that things like ephemeral communication, meaning communication that literally is here and then it's gone, it is instantly or after a matter of minutes or days, it is deleted? We find that in various different apps on various different mobile devices. Do you find that ephemeral communication is something very difficult in your investigations?
I don't find ephemeral messaging, the disappearing apps, as critically important as just messaging apps, which are often on mobile devices that are sometimes owned not by the company, but by individuals. If somebody's using a disappearing app, they're not going to be found most of the time. They are smart enough to be covering their tracks. So if they're using encrypted, highly encrypted or disappearing apps, we're not going to be able to find what actually happened. Frankly, I think that that's a bigger risk for companies if they have people who are designed to do that. But ultimately, the messaging apps is where we are running across both legal and technological issues. We're not necessarily doing ones where it's Signal or where it's actually disappearing. What you're doing is this is on their personal phone, but they use it for business purposes. It's a business record. And they're talking about contracts and they're talking about normal business. Then if DOJ or SEC has a problem and I can't answer and say what happened because I don't have the normal business communications, and we're going to get hit for that. So I think it's a messaging app issue less than an ephemeral messaging app issue. But I do think that what has shifted with the rise of messaging apps and especially the lack of good internet, not good internet access, but good telephonic cell phone access, but good Wi-Fi access around the world, is that we've shifted to messaging apps. And so there has not yet been a institutionalization. Everything else that's out there where there's an enterprise version, I know there are some attempts at it, which has been readily adopted by the corporate and business world. And as long as that is there, there's going to be a gap between how employees communicate, what companies retain, and what the enforcement agencies are expecting.
Describe the proliferation of data. Clearly, it's just completely exploded over the course of your career. And so some of these techniques have been out there for quite a bit. Could you describe for a minute, what you're seeing out there right now? What do you think is truly going to make a difference as, companies investigate these issues, as the government, the technology that they're using to investigate these companies? What's out there that's really speaking to you these days?
I think it very much depends upon the situation that you are facing, the volume of data that you have, and what your goal is. Where I think we have a harder time using this AI or predictive technology is when there is an issue and you are trying to identify what are the most relevant documents. And what I've seen most effective is using it to obviously build chronologies, identify the key people, identify the communication patterns, who's communicating to who, right? When that pattern changes, and frankly, tying it to deletion analysis, I think has been kind of fun too. There are certain aspects of this which can be very useful, but it is making sure that you have a technological team that knows enough of how to do this in a way that you are credible before the enforcement agencies or credible before the board when I'm explaining and saying that, yes, I will vouch that I don't believe there's anything there, or this is the manner in which we've determined that these 3 people need to be disciplined and these 7 people do not.
Well, I think you so succinctly described the value proposition for why, these technologies are useful. I mean, it's the amount of time saved. It's being able to not look at things that that are not interesting. In my own example before, when we used a predictive model to create an analysis that went to the DOJ, we estimated we saved 50,000 hours, which is not an insignificant amount of time. And really, I think the government eventually saw the value in, getting to those answers quickly, getting to a better answer. Paley, I'm curious from a consultant side, what technology is speaking to you these days? I know our teams have done tons of work together. You've relied on our analytics quite a bit. What have you seen out there that, our listeners are going to find interesting?
I couldn't agree with Ned more on the importance of sifting through that massive amount of data to get to the information that we need to help clients and organizations. And one of the things that continue to be a big focus for us, or a big tool for us, is having advanced analytics to run those searches and analyze the data and correlate across multiple factors of importance in an investigation. And that's, again, going to multiple systems, gathering that data very efficiently and processing it with input from the key stakeholders. And I want to emphasize too that when we get to a result of looking at a much smaller set of data than the entire population, that's a result of an iterative process with taking interviews or conducting interviews, conducting document reviews, and feeding the information gathered from all these work streams into the same work stream that drives the data processing and analytics. So I think that's one of the most important things. We see that as an opportunity and also a challenge, right? Because we want to make sure that there are no blind spots, creating a disconnect between the data and other elements of the fact gathering. So that, and I've seen too that data scientists and analysts working a lot more closer with the accountants and the lawyers that are on the same investigative team. As it relates to AI, I do want to kind of highlight a few things. I think AI it has been kind of, as you pointed out, Jared, used by us and others in the field to conduct investigations, to identify red flags and transactions that are worth a second look. When we do this across borders, taking into account different languages, different references, it could add a certain level of challenge. We need to be a step ahead of them, or at least be in step with them to figure out those as soon as possible and then as efficiently as possible.
What's very challenging, as our listeners know who have dealt with predictive coding, technology system review, and also Nat and Paley, I'm certain that you know this. When we talk about that, first of all, that is a form of artificial intelligence, to be clear. So that is definitely, when we talk about AI today, we forget about the fact that all these structured analytics, conceptual searching, name normalization, et cetera. But when we look at what people are really talking about right now with AI, we're really talking about generative AI. We just talk about what the prompt is. And Nat and Paley, I am curious from your perspectives as to whether or not the FCPA investigations within the government is permitting or allowing the utilization of generative AI, which is now embedded into publicly now for most popular e-discovery programs, or any generative AI application for purposes of performing the investigation, again, to save time, to save costs, et cetera. What's the stance currently today?
I think one of the things that your listeners should be aware of is that DOJ has cautioned companies on the use of AI, and that they want to be very confident that companies who use it in their data analytics, in identification on compliance issues, or more broadly, that it is not being misused. And I think that that is why it is critical to make sure you have a good technological partner who knows all of those words that you mentioned, which I don't know, but also can think about it broadly. And this is why it's a team, can think about it broadly from both the technological, the legal, the forensic aspects that are there, because it's a combination of different things that are going to be critical. Generative AI, again, I was a history of religion major in undergrad, so I may not be the most technologically savvy on this, but I know some. It's based on what it's trained on. And if it is trained on the universe of my teenagers talking, that's going to be very different than if it's trained on the universe of corporate executives talking. It's very different than if it's trained on the universe of pharma sales reps in China. And so as we think about what is the AI use, what it is in terms of the linguistic side, whether we're looking at the financials and the transaction testing and identification of outliers there, you need to be thinking about the old term is the seed set, right? But fundamentally, what are you basing that on? I think that ultimately we need to be thinking about what is this going to be used for? And that, from my perspective as an enforcement lawyer, that's the way we're going to be able to convince the US government or agencies around the world that the use of AI is appropriate and we are not intentionally or unintentionally misleading them with our results.
Paley, what's your stance on that as well?
So from my perspective, and I'm a forensic accountant, so I can speak to the legal aspects of it, but my role in many of these are fact-finding. And I do want to have the evidence. I want to be able to trace the flow of assets, the transaction, the exchange of assets. And at the end of the day, it goes back to what can I present to the client that says, yes, this happened or did not happen, or whether we have enough support to say that a certain activity has occurred. In many of the investigations that I've done, the biggest challenge is the omission of data or information. And when it's not there, you couldn't really say it's there. A lot of it can be circumstantial, but that is also helpful for the company to present to the government or for the lawyers to say, okay, this is what we have, and this is what we do not have. Now, how do we make sense out of all of this? So that's the biggest challenge for me, making sure that everything is backed up by facts and backed up by documents. So how we get there, I think AI might be helpful, but again, I think the legality of it has to be assessed by people, by lawyers like Nat and others.
I think a lot of it is, I think there's a number of both law firms and others that are trying to figure out how best to do this and how to use, in particular, data sets or investigative issues that they have internally and how to create their own generative AI aspects so that we can cut thousands of hours off of investigations and reviews, or help identify how best to enhance a compliance program, right? To add to that. These are the ways that I don't think that there's that link yet that is there, but I think everybody is excited about the opportunity because of the challenges with data, the challenges with rising costs in general, and how to be most efficient to help companies solve their biggest problems in a way that they aren't spending more money on this when in a time of conflicting budgets. I'll just put it that way.
One of the more exciting use cases that I think is coming probably on the near horizon is really, being able to use generative AI to help companies' employees get access to the information that they need or to report, what they're seeing, right? Imagine, ethics hotlines, whistleblower hotlines where the person reporting can actually interact with a system and get real data and get some answers as they're kind of describing things. It would also, I think, really allow investigators, who oftentimes just get a very cryptic, report of something going on, would really give them a chance to, maybe get some more information quickly. I'm curious your take on, the DOJ's new whistleblower pilot program and what you think the impact of that's going to be, say, next year.
I'm happy to start on this one. I do think DOJ has recently made some statements that they've received over 100 tips on this issue. I was at DOJ when SEC launched their whistleblower program and the bounty program there, and it has in the FCPA area as well as others, and it has led to very significant awards, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars when you put it all together, to various different individuals and their attorneys. I do think DOJ is seeking some way for them to get more information that is not put through a filter of companies. And this is one way to provide those incentives. The challenge is separating the wheat from the chaff. What is legitimate? What is not? I think DOJ is going to be very focused on getting new information, not just for FCPA, but for a variety of these white collar enforcement issues. And there's a lot of money floating around. And so that leads to both plaintiffs' lawyers and individuals, which are both seeking opportunities, but also competitors willing to or trying to throw their competitors under the bus, right? There's nothing like a FCPA allegation that comes in, which is without justification, that you suddenly spend a huge amount of time and energy on and can impact stock price. So I think that DOJ needs to be cautious in how they vet these, in the same way that the SEC has generally been cautious in terms of vetting these before approaching their companies or making things public. I do think that it is already having an impact as things come in. And as companies are aware of these issues, updating their whistleblower hotline policies, ensuring that there are quick turnaround times in terms of responding to these issues, looking at the data analytics of how long it takes, where it goes, all of these things. It's a renewed emphasis on a topic which has languished, I think, for a little bit, but is increasingly important in a disconnected age, especially as more and more people are outside of the office. And there's not the same personal loyalty that was critical, I think, in long-term employment and belief in the future of the company.
Nat, this has been extremely helpful. I've gotten an education here today, which is always a good sign of a great episode if I could learn something, and I definitely learned something from you. Pei Li, definitely learned something from you as well here today. And, as we're talking about learning new things, if I'm not mistaken, Pei Li, there is an upcoming conference where you all are going to be talking. Can you share a little bit insight as to what's coming up and where people can find you guys?
Thanks, Daniel. So yes, I will be on a panel at the ACI FCPA conference in Washington, D.C. That's going to be in December 4th to 5th. I'm going to be on a panel with Stephanie Acquisti, who's the Global Head of Integrity Investigations at ABB, and Angela Main, who is the Senior VP Global Chief Compliance Officer and Associate GC at Zimmer Biomet. So we will be doing a deeper dive on China, covering some of the challenges of operating in China and discussing the evolving FCPA compliance programs in response to the latest trends, as well as considerations for managing third parties and navigating China's laws and balancing those requirements against expectations from the US regulators.
And I'd just like to jump in and say that it's a fantastic conference and I will be there, and it is an amazing opportunity to learn from distinguished speakers. Pei Li and her fellow panelists will, I'm sure, provide a fantastic insight into this, and I encourage everyone to both go to the conference and attend.
Well, if other people want to be in the front row and also have a badge, can you share where do people go to go ahead and register for this conference?
It will be at this website, and we could probably put that in the registration for this podcast as well at americanconference.com/FCPA-DC.
That's good. And that way, if there are people that are local or people that do want to go to this conference, they can pester all of you with great questions after listening to this podcast as well. Thank you both very, very much for being in our virtual recording studio here today. We really appreciate it. And I know everyone is looking forward to seeing you guys at the conference. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for joining us on BDO's Legal Tech Talk podcast.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe for more episodes.
Head over to BDO.com for a list of all of our episodes, transcripts, resources, and how to get in touch with us to continue the conversation.
Until next time, this has been another episode of BDO's Legal Tech Talk.